Hi there and welcome. So hopefully I'm live. We're going to be watching a bit of Laura Kuenssberg today. I don't know about you guys, but I never got up early enough to watch this myself. So let's just get this on the screen. Bear with me just one moment. One that I want. Okay, let's go.
Time to go home. These are Gazans making their way back after war. The drones and the guns have now fallen silent. Time to come home. The families of Israeli hostages wait their return. Some unsure if their loved ones will return dead or alive. We'll hear from Israel and Gaza this morning as this phase of a deadly war in the Middle East draws to a close.
We are breathing a little bit now because it's supposed to happen. It's supposed to happen today, tomorrow, or the day after. So it's really, really close.
I don't know how everybody's feeling about this. It's kind of bittersweet, I suppose. Obviously, there's a pause in hostilities, which everybody is going to welcome, of course. But then you've got Palestinians returning to absolute decimation, fresh bodies being found under the rubble. I was reading just earlier that it was about 250 bodies had been found under the rubble already, and more will be found, unfortunately. And I'm really pessimistic about this. I don't know, again, how you feel about it, but I kind of feel like a full peace plan has eluded the world since this whole thing began when the British left in 1948. And, the idea that both the Israelis and Palestinians are suddenly going to come together and agree something now, it seems to me to be bordering on absurd. And of course, the ceasefire has been broken in the past by Israel, which unfortunately is what I expect to happen this time. But I really hope I'm wrong. We all want lasting peace. It's just that, geopolitical realities get in the way.
The BBC's international editor, Jeremy Bowen, will join us, along with the Cabinet Minister, Bridget Phillipson, and the Shadow Foreign Secretary, Priti Patel, who are both with us live today. And we'll speak to John Swinney, Scotland's First Minister and leader of the SNP.
Even the introduction winds me up of this show.
Morning. My team at the desk for the next hour, the leader of Plaid Cymru, Rhun Iorwerth, former Conservative Cabinet Minister, now Reform UK member Nadine Dorries, and the former...
A small part of me absolutely loves Nadine Dorries. I don't know what it is.
UN diplomat and Labour Cabinet Minister Baroness Amos. A warm welcome to you all on a very, very big day. Let's start with what is making the news. And of course, it's dominated by events in the Middle East. The Observer front page says there's a burden of hope, showing a striking image of the destruction in Gaza. The Independent on Sunday has those extraordinary scenes from Hostages Square in Tel Aviv. But the Sunday Times leads with the White House weighing in on the saga of the collapsed UK-China spy prosecution. We'll talk about that later on. And the Sunday Telegraph is getting into the warm-up for the budget, suggesting Rachel Reeves is going to raise taxes. And Jeffrey Epstein's emails are back. This time, one from Prince Andrew makes its way to the front of the...
I bet they don't talk very much about this. If you actually read the details of what he wrote in these emails, absolutely disgraceful. So he says something like, "We're all in this together now." And then he says, "We'll play very soon." But the date of the email is, I think it's 2010. And in that famous interview with Emily Maitlis, he'd said that he hadn't spoken to Jeffrey Epstein after a certain point, and these emails are after that point. So these are really incriminating. Obviously, most normal people believe the allegations. They remain allegations, and they will remain allegations, of course, because the police are very unlikely to ever investigate them, either here or abroad.
On Sunday and the Mail on Sunday. But let's show you exactly what's happening right now in the Middle East. This is Khan Yunis in Gaza. You can see there people in the streets walking through destruction. This is then what's happening in Tel Aviv in Israel, where in the last many months families have gathered, hopeful and campaigning for their families' return. But today,
Yeah, it's a good day to have a ceasefire, but just look at the contrast in those two images. You have utter destruction in Gaza, and then obviously living side by side, the Israelis living really quite peaceful lives.
of course, a mood of celebration after extraordinary events in the last 24 hours. Let's start with all of this. I mean, Baroness Amos, you're a former Overseas Development Secretary and a very senior diplomat at the United Nations. It looks like a very different kind of diplomacy under Donald Trump is what's made the difference here.
Well, it's such a massive breakthrough moment, isn't it? And you can see the relief and the joy on the...
I'm going to respond to some of the comments since people are asking questions. I think reform will win in Wales. Certainly won't be the Labour Party, and that, you know, the fact that anybody's winning in Wales other than Labour is a big shock, right? Because Labour have been the most successful political party probably anywhere. If you just look at Wales, they've never lost a Welsh parliamentary election. Why do I like Nadine Dorries? I just find her funny, to be honest. The comic character. It's the same part of me that had a, you know, kind of liked Boris Johnson, not because of any of the impact he had in the country or what he represented, but you know, he was a mildly affable man, I suppose. Difficult question. I think Thatcher, then Cameron, but they're pretty close, aren't they? The big difference actually between Cameron and Thatcher is Thatcher said she cut the size of the state and never did, whereas austerity really did bite, and it really did cut the size of the state. Okay, let's continue.
Faces of the people in Gaza and in Israel. The killings are going to stop, the hostages are going to return home. But you don't get this kind of breakthrough moment without a huge amount of work happening behind the scenes. I mean, Oslo was over 30 years ago, and we thought that was a big breakthrough moment then. I think the difference now, President Trump is someone who really understands how to use power, and he has used his influence with Prime Minister Netanyahu. But without that continuous work behind the scenes by lots of individuals, organisations, the countries in the Middle East, the contacts that people have with each other, we would not have got to this moment.
Yeah, and imagine if the United States had put that pressure on Israel right at the beginning, how different the world would have been today. I do find it a little bit galling to hear this praise heaped on a US president when, had Britain, had the United States, had France, had Germany, had these big states done the right thing right at the beginning of the conflict and said to Israel, yes, a horrendous thing has happened. We stand with you. You know, what they should have called for is a proportionate response to what happened. And what we got instead was a massively disproportionate response that unfortunately ended in genocide. And I use that word because that is the language used by the United Nations.
Nadine, what do you think of this?
I think it's actually all happened very quickly. You know, people can have whatever personal opinion they wish of President Trump, but the fact is that he has delivered on this, and I think it's been his efforts as a businessman, as a deal maker, as somebody who has, you know, only a few weeks ago he was saying to Hamas, a few days ago, if you don't agree to this, we will let Netanyahu do exactly what he wants to. It took that strength, that will, that determination to make this happen. It is absolutely all down to President Trump.
Rhun, do you think it is that form of strongman diplomacy rather than careful work of years that has got this to happen?
Well, I think it's clear that the US administration has played a very key role in getting us to this point on this particular peace deal, if that is indeed what it turns out to be. But it's also obvious that there is a coming together of international pressure here. I think the Observer's got the headline line quite right, though. A burden of hope, because this is our hope. This has to work, but the burden, the need to make that turn into something lasting now is enormous on all of us.
Yeah, and it's going to require massive pressure from citizens across the world to push our governments, put pressure on this situation to try and get an actual long-term peaceful solution, which is why people criticising. Look, I didn't go this weekend. I was going to go to London this weekend, but I actually felt, the ceasefire's just happened. So I won't go on Saturday. But I can understand why people did go, because it's going to need pressure from the international community for this to turn into a lasting peace and for the ceasefire not to be broken by Israel as it was last time. Yes, the live stream is going to be a regular thing, hopefully. I'm hoping to do one every Thursday and every Sunday, but I don't want to commit myself to anything. Best US president is obviously FTR.
This is always the moment, isn't it? You can announce something, but the implementation, what happens next, those parties being really dogged about what do we have to do to make this really, really stick. Yeah. And don't get me wrong, it's not that I'm in any way trying to underplay the role that the US and President Trump has played. The US is absolutely critical in all of this. But if those connectivities and connections don't exist underneath, you can't get to this point. We have to recognise both.
And we'll talk about some of those challenges ahead in just a second with Jeremy Bowen, but let's remind you exactly what is happening right now. So the proscribed terror group Hamas are due to release the Israeli hostages within the next 24 hours. That has...
The proscribed terror group Hamas, right? And in exactly the same category, we have Palestine Action. I'm sure people know this because I released a video about it, but I was one of the people arrested for holding up signs saying I oppose genocide, I support Palestine Action. I'm currently on police bail under the Terrorism Act, which is absurd. But what we know from people who've been arrested in this situation is that people are being charged. The only reason more people haven't been charged up to this point is because the police are totally overloaded with the number of people that have taken the same sort of action. I've said all of this in my video, but the main reason I did it really was because I found the British government's approach to the prescription to be a totally unwarranted attack on free speech. That's why I did what I did. Just sort of defending myself against what might come in the chat, but that's why I did what I did. But isn't it absurd that a group like Palestine Action are in exactly the same category, according to the British government, as Hamas?
Given something rare in the Middle East, hope. And you could see it last night. Thousands of Israelis gathering in Hostages Square in Tel Aviv. Huge celebrations in anticipation of the remaining hostages coming home. Donald Trump's son-in-law and his...
So I think the best British Prime Minister is Clement Attlee for setting up the post-war consensus. I do not have a criminal record in the sense of, I haven't been charged for anything. I am on bail, unfortunately, for holding up a sign. And yeah, people should just oppose that. We have democratic rights enshrined in the European Convention on Human Rights that Reform UK want to take away. But we do still have those rights. And whilst we have them, people should be defending them.
Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff spoke to the crowd. There's his daughter Ivanka too. And we spoke to one of those people who was there, Omri Lifshitz, whose parents were taken by Hamas on October the 7th.
We're all holding our breath, yes, but we are breathing a little bit now because it's supposed to happen. It's supposed to happen today, tomorrow, or the day after. So it's really, really close. You can feel, you see people that never smiled before start smiling and happy. So it's a big change, and hope everything will go by the plan and they all will be returned soon. My parents both were kidnapped from their home in Kibbutz Nir Oz. My mother was taken to Hamas and released after 17 days, humanitarian release. My father taken separately injured, but they treat him. But after 20 days, he died in captivity because no treatments. and returned after in the last deal in February to proper burial. Like my mother said, she's feeling that she's been released, but she's still in captivity until they all return.
What's this moment like for families still waiting for the return of their loved ones?
The live one was supposed to, all of them were supposed to return, so they're really happy, and you can feel it. They start smiling. People we never saw smile because we didn't know them before the 7th of October. But now they're still smiling. People with kids over there and parents and brothers. But the one with the murder one, they really hope that they all return, and it's like a mixed situation. They're happy for the one that's returning and really waiting to see if their relative will return.
And Omri, what would you say?
Yeah, obviously it's very good that the hostages are returning, but it's important to note that the Israeli government didn't prioritise the return of the hostages. Had they really wanted peace sooner, that would have happened. The Israeli government is dominated by very, very right-wing figures who want to create a greater Israel, and that requires the people of Gaza to be displaced. And that's what they were trying to achieve, and they've done a pretty good job of it. They've decimated the place. And even if the peace deal succeeds, what they're going to have is a Gaza Strip that is no longer controlled by Hamas. It'll be controlled by the United States, with figures like Tony Blair having a key influence. So, Israel are getting what they want out of this. My favourite Prime Minister, just answering a question in the chat, since 1970, probably be Gordon Brown. Maybe that's a controversial choice, but I think if you include what he did as Chancellor, as well as his time as Premier, where he was very influential in staving off a much worse economic crisis, then I think he should race up there. Of course, he doesn't win any elections, but I'd probably say Gordon Brown. And of course, had he won that election, Labour would have implemented austerity too, so that's not great, but they would have at least implemented it slower. And what they said they would do is to mostly do tax rises rather than cut spending.
Say to the leaders on all sides of this who have to make this work in the long term?
Ending the war, never get them to fight in Gaza, build Gaza back, bring all the humanitarian, build the place and bring it back to a very good place for the people of Gaza. I don't care about the Hamas, what's up, I hope they will not return. And I hope they're going to finish also the war in the western territories in Israel, the occupied territories, and we start living in a peace place. This agreement is agreement with Hamas. It's not a peace agreement. I hope they keep going for peace agreement, because peace you're doing between nation and nation or people and people. So that's what I hope, that we'll never fight again.
A powerful plea for peace. Meanwhile, 500,000 Palestinians have been returning to their homes, but now many of them in rubble in northern Gaza, pummeled.
It's really shocking to see that, isn't it? Really shocking. These scenes like that. I don't know where this footage is coming from. My understanding was that journalists weren't allowed back in to Gaza, but that might have changed. I mean, I guess Israel will not want journalists to go back in, because when they do, they're going to see scenes of devastation like this, and they're going to be able to unearth the truth of what happened there. But yeah, really, really shocking.
By Israeli bombardment for 2 years. The United Nations is back in charge of distributing aid, and more trucks have been entering the area this morning. But feeding the population after 2 years of war is a profound challenge, as May Elauda, who lives and works in southern Gaza with medical aid for Palestine, told me a bit earlier this morning.
For now, after a couple of days, we can't say for sure that the aid comes in have loosened the situation on the ground. Palestinians still face many challenges finding basic life needs. We as Palestinians still processing the idea that the killing has stopped, but we fully know that we are returning literally to rubbles, from starting from zero again. We are talking about hundreds of thousands of patients who have been, cut off from medication that they need. So it wouldn't change overnight. It wouldn't change overnight. But we as humanitarians, we really can't wait to have the aid coming into the strip. And so finally, we would be able to support people on the ground.
May, where you are in Deir el-Balah, have you seen any evidence of aid beginning to flow, beginning to arrive?
To be honest, I can't really grasp that things has loosened in a way that would everybody would feel the difference. I still cannot find the difference.
There are 2 million people living in Gaza. I just don't know how. I just don't know how the world can stand by and do nothing in the face of, the future for these people is going to be absolutely dreadful. And what I'm sort of worried about happening, and I know will happen, is that the world will move on, forget about what happened and forget about these people as they return to rubble. In order to have a long-term future, our governments are going to have to invest vast amounts of money into post-war reconstruction. I'm really hopeful that that's what happens, but history tells us that that's quite unlikely.
Do you recognise Gaza after these 2 years of war, the place you've lived your whole life?
I believe we can no longer recognise ourselves as human beings, starting with the idea of going back to north. The Israeli army have been forcing us Palestinians to head south to the so-called humanitarian areas. While we know that heading to south never saved anybody's life and Palestinians would be attacked there, still we are trying to process that our feet can take us back to the north. And I know this might sound crazy, but it is what the Israeli army has engraved in our consciousness. And we know, we are happy about this, but we know full well that the road to the north is something like a man-made wasteland, is that we are returning to rubbles. We are returning to a place that we can no longer recognize. And it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking.
Well, the ceasefire, the release of hostages and some Palestinian prisoners are just the first phase of President Trump's peace plan.
I accidentally skipped a bit there. Just skipped to the end. Oh, no, I think I'm okay, actually. Let's continue. Sorry. Hopefully, by the way, you can't hear my breathing as much on this. I fiddled with the settings a little bit, so you shouldn't be able to hear background noise. So hopefully that's working. And hopefully the microphone level is okay. If it needs turning up a bit, let me know. I've sort of turned it down for this stream because I thought it was a bit loud when I listened to it back. But let me know if the sound is okay.
There is a long list of challenges and difficulties ahead, and the future does not look certain. Jeremy Bowen, our international editor, is in Jerusalem, and just before we came on air, I asked him about what's happening now and what could come next.
The next 24 hours are really important for both sides, but I think especially initially for the Israelis, because finally they're going to get the hostages back, and it isn't quite certain about the timings, but the consensus now appears to be Monday morning, but that isn't final. And then for the Palestinians who are being released, the 250 serving life sentences and 1,700 others who've been detained in Gaza since the war started. Of course, for them and for their families, getting out of prison is going to be, a major and joyful moment in the Palestinian community.
The list of challenges ahead is dizzying, isn't it?
What are you wanting me to answer? There's lots of comments. You see, if you type too fast, I can't see them all. There's lots of people talking about the Welsh and Scottish elections. I've not looked at the polling recently. What do we know? We know Labour are not going to do very well, and Labour Labour did well in both of those places last time. So in Scotland, I would imagine the SNP are going to do very well. I haven't looked at the polling, but they're the natural alternative, right, to Labour in Scotland. And Reform are going to oddly do quite well in Scotland and in Wales. So I think it'll be the nationalist parties and it'll be Reform that do well, but I've not looked into it in any great deal of detail. I haven't done very much on Northern Ireland. That's because there's a hell of a lot to get into as soon as you start talking about that, including what you even call it. So personally, I don't normally call it Northern Ireland. I call it the North of Ireland, which reveals some of my politics around that. You're certainly not going to get an unbiased video from me about that question, nor should you, because politics is about having wrong views about history and economics and all manner of things.
How do you see this next phase unfolding?
Yes, I think it's a difficult phase. There's going to be a very quick meeting.
I went on the ECHR. Obviously this is not just, again, a hypothetical question for me. Because I've been arrested under the Terrorism Act, my defence will be that I have a right to freedom of thought and expression. I've got a right to protest. Those rights are enshrined in the ECHR, alongside loads of other rights. If those rights go, then yeah, we're in massive trouble, because we have parliamentary sovereignty in the UK, which means that Parliament can do whatever it likes by passing statute. It can derogate from any domestic legislation. So if you replace the ECHR with a British Bill of Rights, which is what they're proposing, then we might have rights on paper, but those rights will not be entrenched in any meaningful way. There won't be an outside court that can enforce them. And whilst the ECHR has not actually been that active in the UK, contrary to what people suggest, I think we've only lost 4 cases at the ECHR. I mean, it's something very, very low, right? The ECHR is not constantly intervening in our lives in the UK, and it's not constantly telling the British government that it can't do anything. And its judgments aren't that powerful anyway. But even so, they're a slight constraint on the British government. If you get rid of that and you replace it with the British Bill of Rights, the government can just derogate from those rights when it passes legislation, which the word derogate just means ignore, right? So it doesn't really provide a constraint at all if we're not members of the ECHR. And of course, it will also place us in pretty bad company. I think it's just Russia, Belarus and Greece that have left the ECHR. Greece then rejoined, so it's just Russia and Belarus that are not in it. It's not a great company to be in, is it?
In Egypt with Donald Trump, with President Sisi of Egypt, Keir Starmer is due to go over there, various other leaders. But frankly,
I haven't done any videos about foreign policy at all. So my content is British politics. So I did a series on prime ministers, a series on elections, and then I tend to do domestic politics. So that's why I haven't done a video on October the 7th or any other foreign policy matter. So yeah, that's the reason.
I don't have a great deal of time to do anything very concrete. This first phase of the hostage release and the prisoner exchange afterwards, that's all settled, choreographed, ready to go. I think it's going to happen. The ceasefire seems at the moment pretty okay. I think not least because the Americans are pushing the Israelis very strongly not to break it. And however, in terms of governance of Gaza, security in Gaza, both for the Palestinians and for the Israelis over the border, for the future economy of the territory, and also the idea of having a multinational force in place. None of these things, the details, the hard detail, the really difficult stuff, has been agreed. The Trump 20-point plan simply essentially points to where they want it to go and what the objective is. How you get there has not been worked out, and that's where the real problems, I think, are going to start. And when there are problems in that process, that will impact on the stability, ultimately, I think, of the ceasefire.
How fragile does this new peace feel to you?
This is a day, today and tomorrow is a day, I think, for everybody to celebrate. And I think it is absolutely right to say that Donald Trump has scored a diplomatic triumph in making this happen so quickly. But underlying everything that's happening is this conflict between Israelis and Palestinians for control of the land between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean Sea. That started more than a century ago. It's complicated, it's multifaceted, it's multi-layered, and it's generational. And until the fundamentals of that are sorted out and settled in a way that both sides can accept, sadly, I'm absolutely certain the conflict will continue.
Well, Keir Starmer.
I mean, anybody that knows anything about the conflict will be pessimistic about securing long-term peace. It's very difficult. There are lots of questions that need addressing. There are lots of red lines that both sides will want to stick to. So I'm not very optimistic. And there's also the geopolitical reality that Israel have just got away with committing genocide in the Gaza Strip, and the international community have demonstrated themselves to be very weak in the face of what Israel have done. So, you know, my view is we've given them carte blanche to do whatever the hell they want to do in the future. So it's not the kind of situation where you'd expect Israel to be compromising on some of the key issues that are going to need to be resolved to have lasting peace. I personally think Israel will break the ceasefire. I hope I'm wrong. But there we go. So there's lots of discussion in the chat about the ECHR and refugees. So a lot of what is in the media around this is just straightforwardly wrong. So right-wing politicians want to argue that the reason we can't deport people who have no right to be here is because of the ECHR, because of things like the Refugee Convention. Well, first of all, where we can't deport, it's for very good reasons. So the legal term for this is refoulement. We're not allowed under international law to deport people into situations where they may face torture, persecution, mistreatment, murder, etc. And of course, that's why the convention exists. That's why human rights exists. We wouldn't want to be deporting people into those situations. So when Reform say to you, well, we want to get rid of all of that, we want to get rid of that constraint, what they're really saying is we want to deport people into situations where their lives are going to be at risk. That's the reality. But because the people we're talking about have been so thoroughly dehumanized, lots of people won't hear that reality. But even so, only 3.5% of cases have been blocked because of ECHR-based reasons. So the whole discourse is a lie. The reason we're not able to deport people from the UK is not because of the European Convention on Human Rights. And it is so negative for all of us if we get rid of our rights, that we all should be united in opposing doing this, because it's not necessary for the reasons they cite, and the consequences for everybody are terrible.
Will travel to Egypt, and there tomorrow world leaders will put their names to this hard-won agreement that's brought an end to the fighting for now. But as Jeremy was telling us, there is huge trepidation about whether or not this peace will hold. The Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, is with us this morning. Welcome to you. This is, as Jeremy said, a moment for everyone to celebrate. But is it the government's view that this war is really over?
Well, this, of course, is a massive step forward and very welcome. To see the ceasefire, to see more humanitarian aid getting in. And we hope and pray that within hours, the release of the remaining hostages back to their families in Israel. But this can only be the start of a process. We know that we need to see a viable Palestinian state alongside a safe and secure Israel. That's the government's position. That's what we want to continue to be involved in making happen, and why the Prime Minister Keir Starmer is tomorrow travelling to Egypt.
But does the UK really have a role here? I mean, it's very clear the difference here was American diplomacy working with Middle Eastern countries here. Does the UK really have a role?
We do have a role, but of course the role of the US has been critical in this. We can all recognise that.
OK, what's happened in the Middle East has brought huge attention to the conversation here around protest, freedom of speech, and in particular around rising levels of anti-Semitism. You said in May it was a national emergency, anti-Semitism on schools and on university campuses. But Jewish students we've spoken to in the last couple of days have told us they're still scared.
Yeah.
So what are you doing about it? Has what you said in May made any difference?
So what we have now in terms of university campuses is further action that universities can take following changes that the regulator, the Office for Students, has made. But what I'm also setting out today is more funding, more support around training for staff and for students to tackle this poison of anti-Semitism. We have seen an unacceptable increase in anti-Semitism in recent.
Anti-Semitism is really a horrible thing, and we all need to be united in challenging it and standing up for Jewish people when they face persecution, as they did recently with the horrible terrorist attack that happened at a synagogue in Manchester. But what we need to not do is to forget that that people of all minorities face racism all of the time. So just down the road from where I live in Peacehaven, there was an arson attack on a mosque, and I attended a vigil there with the local community to stand against that racism in the community I live in. And we also need to, in this debate, not conflate anti-Semitism with criticism of the state of Israel. And I feel like that is what is happening a lot of the time. The protests that are happening in London are protests that are about politics, they're about what's happening in Gaza. I don't agree with all of the chants that people chant. When I attend protests, I don't chant all of the chants. I'll join the march, because I'm in general agreement with what people are there for. But some of the chants, I personally wouldn't chant. And it does make me sad if people genuinely feel threatened by, differences of opinion about a foreign conflict. But it's important that we retain that word, anti-Semitism, but when it's actually needed. Because if we throw it around cheaply, then it denudes the concept of its meaning. And my view is that puts Jewish people in even more threat if we do that. And what she's going to go on to say is that this is being used as an excuse to clamp down on freedom of expression on university campuses and more broadly, which I am dead against.
Times in our country. I've had those same conversations with British students, with British young people and their families, including in the last week following the terrible events that we saw in Manchester. And what I heard loud and clear is that in many cases we see Jewish young people feeling that they need to conceal their identity, that on campus Jewish students don't feel safe, and often parents worrying about sending their children to university. We cannot accept that. There can be no place for it. And that's why I'm being clear with university vice-chancellors that alongside the funding that we're putting in place to provide training for staffing, particularly those working on security and on student welfare, to educate around anti-Semitism and how to protect students, there can be no place for harassment and intimidation. Universities can and must act on that. And the regulator, the Office for Students, has also been absolutely clear on that point.
But you have been talking about this for some months now, and in May you called it a national emergency. We've talked to student groups in the last couple of days, and the charity Stand With Us told us at one university, and we've been asked not to name it for safety reasons, a group of anti-Israeli students have compiled a list of Jewish students so they can be marked and then harassed. I mean, this has been happening for quite some time, and your £7 million you're talking about today, actually that money had already been announced. So do you accept that you should have done much more far earlier?
Well, the training I'm talking about in universities is just about to commence, and I have been doing a lot of work both in public and behind the scenes.
I mean, look, it goes both ways, doesn't it? Conflating Israel and Jewish shouldn't be done. So, if there are people on my side of the argument who are targeting Jewish students because of their political opinions about the state of Israel, then that is anti-Semitism, because what they're doing is they're conflating the actions of the Israeli state with Jewish people more generally. But that's exactly what politicians shouldn't be doing the other way around. Any conflating between these two things is wrong and needs to be called out.
with Jewish community groups, with students and with university vice-chancellors, pushing them to do more. And where it comes to that specific case that you identified, I would encourage anyone with information like that to share it with the relevant university authorities, because there are disciplinary processes that universities will follow and they will take action against anyone engaged in that kind of abuse.
Well, what about this as an example? So the rap duo Bob Vylan, and people will remember the story about their performance at Glastonbury, their comments were described by the government as clearly anti-Semitic. That act is due to perform at Manchester Academy, which is on the Manchester University campus next month. Should that be cancelled?
I don't know the specifics in terms of the ownership of the site and where that sits, but I am deeply, deeply troubled by some of what we've heard from the individual in question in that group about the fear and intimidation that could cause. Now, universities have powers to take action to prevent harassment and intimidation, because universities
you say you don't know the details.
I don't know the ownership of the site and whether it's. What I'm saying to you is I don't know whether that site is within the grounds and the land owned by the university. Sometimes what we've seen is that protesters will seek to intimidate students arriving onto campus, but will do so off the site of university land.
Manchester Academy is associated strongly with Manchester University. The university, therefore, do you think, should they cancel that performance?
Saying it's associated with it doesn't, I'm afraid, answer my question. I don't know the answer to that specific point about where it's
This
located.
has been in the news for the last few days. Did you not want to find that out?
I don't know the specifics about where it is located, but I would.
I just don't really buy this whole discourse. Maybe I'm missing something, but there are lots of forms of protest that I would find distressing and upsetting. And I don't think that in general that is a reason to be stifling freedom of speech and discussion. That's the whole point of the entire discourse around freedom of speech, from John Stuart Mill's On Liberty onwards, is to say, look, you might find it distressing or upsetting that I have opinions that differ from yours, but we are entitled to hold those views, to express them. I've had to put up with my entire life as a gay man, people preaching about the Bible and saying that who I am is a sin. Do I want to stop them from doing that? Well, I'd rather not walk down the street and hear that, but there are things that are more important than my feelings, and freedom of speech is one of them. So I'm just not convinced by this. So I think we need to draw a really clean line between what is clearly anti-Semitism, what is clearly racism, and what is people legitimately protesting something. And we need to, be really suspicious of politicians weaponizing the culture war to take away our freedoms.
Urge university vice-chancellors to use all of the powers that they have available to them to make sure that universities are safe environments for all students. We cannot have a situation where Jewish students feel unable to go onto campus for fear of harassment and intimidation.
Okay.
There are comments going on about who should replace Starmer as leader. The answer is Andy Burnham. But I don't know if somebody was joking when they said Bridget would do a better job. I mean, I'd love to see it happen just for the lols. Terrible. She's exactly one of these cardboard cutout politicians with the robotic answers. Exactly what turns people off politics. Totally insufferable. As is Keir Starmer, right?
This is obviously going to be a conversation that will go on for some time, but there's another huge story that the government is grappling with. Parliament is back tomorrow, and there will be questions about the collapse of...
Miliband is the only other possibility. And personally, I'm a bit of a fan of Ed Miliband. So I'd kind of like that. And the person that's spamming the chat about the Falkland Island elections, I don't know anything about the Falkland Island elections, and I don't care about the Falkland Island elections. I'm really sorry.
Trial of two men accused of spying for China. It's riled the White House now, according to the Sunday Times, and it has puzzled a lot of people here. The government's first explanation was that this case was nothing to do with the ministers. Then there was a different explanation from the Prime Minister this week, who said, it was because of what the former government did. What's your explanation today for why that case collapsed?
So we are deeply disappointed that the case hasn't proceeded. These date back to events in 2023. So this did take place under the previous government. Obviously, the Crown Prosecution Service are best placed to explain why they were not able
they
to
said,
bring forward a prosecution. But what I can be absolutely clear about is that ministers and others, including the National Security Advisor, had no role to play in either the substance of the case or the evidence in question. And evidential questions are matters for the Crown Prosecution Service.
Well, the Crown Prosecution...
Just going back to the chat, I've actually lost track of what they're talking about on here. On sovereignty in general, as the Good Friday Agreement says, the North of Ireland will return to the Republic whenever there is a settled majority in both parts for that to happen. And I think that's exactly right. And I think the same should be applied to any territory that wants to be independent. So the Falkland Islanders need to vote for it, and so do Argentina. And the Falkland Islanders are not going to vote for it, are they? We have to respect the democratic will of the people living there, I'm afraid.
The Prosecution Service boss took the extraordinary step of saying in the public domain that he didn't have the evidence because the government refused to give it to him, even though people like the boss of MI5 have been saying 4 years again in public that China is a threat.
So we are clear that China presents threats, challenges and also opportunities. We have to be clear-eyed about that. But what will always come first is our national security as a nation. Yes, there are trading opportunities that come in terms of our work with China, a major economy, but what will always matter most is the national security of this country.
And the National Security Advisor, Jonathan Powell, there's been a lot of fingers being pointed at him. Can you say with confidence today that he was not involved in any discussions about the evidence being presented in this case?
What I can say today, to be absolutely clear, is that he was not involved in the substance of the case and discussions around that or the evidence connected to the case. I can give you that reassurance. He did not have those conversations around the substance or the evidence of the case. These are matters for the relevant authorities, the Crown Prosecution Service, and they date back to 2023. And I'm not making a partisan point when I say this, but there was a different government in office then and a different legal framework. The law has...
I didn't listen to the initial question. I'm usually good at picking up what the hell they're talking about, but I've literally got no idea what they're talking about here. Maybe I need to pay attention to politics more. I stopped listening for like 5 seconds. On China more generally, I think that we are foolish to be making an enemy of China, and it would be much better for us to do what Nixon did and to try and have a cordial relationship with China. We don't want war with China. We don't want discord with China. We don't want to push China into the arms of Russia. We don't want to push India into the arms of Russia. But that is what's happening at the moment. And that's because of our saber rattling. We should do that less. Because nobody wants war. Nobody wants hostility in the world. Returning to what I said earlier, the Good Friday Agreement says that whenever there is a settled majority in favour of joining the South, so long as the South agree, then the Republic of Ireland will become the whole of Ireland. That's not going to happen anytime soon. But, you know, I support the Good Friday Agreement, and I think that the principles embodied in that agreement apply more generally. It's up to the people who live places to decide on their own futures. And that applies to Scotland, it applies to Wales, it applies to Gibraltar, it applies to the Falkland Islands. I believe in democracy.
Since change, we now have the National Security Act, and that is materially relevant.
OK, well, I'm sure there'll be questions about this in Parliament tomorrow. You are also, as well as your day job, running to become the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party. And you say you will give members more of a chance to get in touch and have their views represented by formally asking them what they want to say every few months. Are you doing that because members have been ignored till now, do you think?
I mean, I've been travelling the length and breadth of the country speaking to members, and I'll be doing so later on this afternoon. Yes, members do want to be more involved in our parties. No, I don't think they've been ignored, but I think they quite rightly want to be more involved in the party's processes. That's why I'm setting out changes around how we listen to members, how we involve them in our policy discussions. You know, our members do a brilliant job getting out and making the case for a Labour government on the doors, but they get involved in the Labour Party because they want to change our country and to change society. So we need to give them more of a role in that, and that's what I'm saying. But why I'm standing to be Deputy Leader is because I want to unite our party to deliver real change that people feel, including our party members. But I'll do that as a campaign.
The Labour have lost like about 200,000 members since the peak under Jeremy Corbyn. They're still the biggest political party in the country, I think. I think Reform UK is after that. then the Conservative Party, and then the Greens, who are on around about 100,000 members now, and look set perhaps to overtake the Conservative Party in coming weeks and months, potentially.
Voice at the cabinet table, able to get things done and to also tell the story better about what this Labour government is delivering. Look, we've made mistakes over the last year. I've been the first to admit that. But if we don't shout about our successes in government, whether that's expanding free school meals, expanding childcare, new breakfast clubs, no one else is going to do that for us.
But a lot of people in the party think that you are, because you're in the cabinet and you'd be doing this job, basically, it would be therefore impossible for you to be really candid. It would be impossible for you to really say to the Prime Minister, hang on, you're getting that completely wrong. And you've accused your rival in this race, Lucy Powell, who we spoke to last week, of being divisive, that she might be divisive in that job. Do you agree with the briefing from your camp that she couldn't be trusted not to brief or leak? And the New Statesman magazine was told the idea she'd be welcomed back is laughable.
Well, I don't know about that, and I don't know where that's come from. But what I can say is that what we've had in recent times was Angela Rayner in government as deputy leader. When we were last in government, when we were last in government, we had John Prescott also in government as deputy leader, and no one questioned whether they were effective in getting things done. Angela Rayner was an amazing deputy leader and running a big government department at the same time. There is a risk that comes of being outside of that, not just in the nature of the discussion and the risk that comes of having those conversations in public and what it could gift our opponents. But alongside that, it's just about getting things done. I think members can judge me on my record of what I've achieved over the last year. And much of that wasn't easy. And I fought tooth and nail to do it. And I will always make my views known. I will always make my case. And anyone who's been in any meetings with me in the past will know that I am not backwards in coming forward.
And if the government didn't lift the limit on bigger families getting benefits, which you want them to do, would you resign from government if you were the deputy leader?
I am confident that we as a government will do the right thing by children growing up in poverty in our country. We've already started that process. There's more to do. I will make that happen.
OK, Bridget Phillipson, thanks very much indeed for coming in and talking about a range of subjects this morning.
To answer the chat, I don't know enough about the Chagos Islands, I'm afraid, to have a particularly strong opinion. There are certain things in politics that just totally wash over me. I know that lots of people are very animated about it, but aside from that, don't really have a strong view, I'm afraid. But I might look into it now that you've brought it up. I'll probably have a view next time I'm on. God, she's dull, Bridget, isn't she? I don't really like to judge politicians by how much they make me want to tear my hair out, but there's just something about this sort of politician that drives me mad, and I think probably drives everybody else mad, because it's almost like you're just pressing play on the answers. Like the level of sort of, it's like speaking to a robot almost. Like, and it feels like almost all of our politicians are like this, and this is part of the reason why people are turning away from mainstream parties, as well as the fact that, of course, mainstream parties have not done enough to address people's material interests. But it is a reason why people like Farage. A similar reason why people liked Boris Johnson. He just said it how it was. I think Zach Polanski's got that a little bit, not as much as the other two, to be honest. But we need more politicians who just say it as it is. I've got to say, during the Gaza situation, I've really missed Tony Benn, because I felt like when I was growing up, Tony Benn was a real voice of moral clarity, and we don't have anybody in our politics who matches the moral clarity, the intelligence, the wit, the quality of his speech. Tony Benn is greatly missed, unfortunately. And indeed, all of the politicians of his generation were better than anything that I think we have today. We need better people in our politics.
On this busy day. Now, as ever, we, of course, want to know what you think, so do get in touch. Email us at kuenssberg@bbc.co.uk, or if you're social media inclined, you can use the hashtag BBC Laura K. Right then, our trio at the desk listening intently. Baroness Amos, you're as a former cabinet minister, but senior diplomat, when you hear the government talking about, well, look, this is what needs to happen next, the UK does have a role. What can the UK actually do in this situation?
Well, I think there are several things. The UK obviously has a smaller role than the United States. I mean, the United States is absolutely central here, but we are a member of the UN Security Council, and what we can do through the UN, we have to make sure right now that humanitarian aid gets in immediately. I've been in touch with my former colleagues at the UN. They have a plan for 60 days of intense getting aid in, making sure healthcare hospitals are back up and running. Water and sanitation is a big issue, because if that is not sorted out, then it means that disease will spread. So our role at the United Nations is absolutely critical, but also the role that we play in relation to the international bodies that will oversee implementation is also going to be crucial.
And Rhun, this conflict, if we just step back for a minute from the...
I'm going to come to the chat. Conversation here about whether reform should be labelled as fascist. It's not language I would use. However, it depends from whose perspective you are asking that question, right? It's going to feel pretty fascist to the people who reform are going to be forcibly removing from this country by removing their settled status. It's going to feel pretty fascist to people who are going to be sent, arriving on our shores back to countries where they're not safe, because we've left the ECHR and the Refugee Convention. And that's just as a starting point. So again, I don't use that language myself, but it's important to understand that fascists don't arrive wearing jackboots and marching down the street. They arrive in much more subtle ways than that. I would say that Farage is certainly authoritarian. His great political hero was Enoch Powell, who was both a Thatcherite and an authoritarian. So that's what I would expect in government. I'd expect somebody who is populist, as Powell was, somebody who is Thatcherite, somebody who is incredibly authoritarian. So maybe the closest parallel would be somebody like Pinochet. So, the truth is we don't know whether the label fascist applies, but what we do know should worry us a little, to say the least.
Technicalities of what might happen next. It's had a huge impact on politics here as well, even though it's thousands of miles away.
It certainly has, and perhaps this is not the day to be too partisan, but there's been deep disillusionment at the willingness of UK government to step up with its condemnation of the genocide that we've witnessed in Gaza, and the need to condemn the Israeli leadership for that. It certainly is having an impact, and I think it's crystallised many of the values that are important to us here. When my party was calling for a ceasefire, it was because these are values that have always been important to us as a party. And now as we move forward to making this still fragile peace, hopefully something that lasts, the need for that international solidarity, to answer your question about the UK's role, is very, very important. Countries large... I'm
going to skip ahead to the next interview. Sorry, Nadine. Some interesting stuff about the polling in the Welsh elections there. Plaid Cymru on 30%, Reform just behind them. It's looking pretty close, those elections. Not particularly interested in that interview though. Have they got anybody else on? Let's just have Priti Patel. That's going to wind me up the most. Then once we're done with that, I will end the stream. I'll have a slightly shorter stream today, partly because I need the loo. And I'm not well organised enough to have like a screen that I can put on whilst I go to the loo. Let's have Priti Patel.
Talking about the politics there. Let's, though, return to these huge events in the Middle East, our focus for today. Priti Patel was Home Secretary in Boris Johnson's government, and she now shadows the Foreign Office for the Conservatives. Good morning. Thank you.
So Priti Patel was responsible for a lot of the anti-protest legislation that I've put in quite a few of my videos. The policing Act, for example, which makes it a criminal offence to engage in noisy and disruptive protest. That was the Public Order Act as well, that was used to shut down protests around the coronation. All of that legislation is still in place. Labour Party, not only did they not get rid of it, they're actually wanting to double down on it and make protest even harder in this country. I'm not a big fan of Priti Patel, but let's see what she's got to say.
Thank you very much indeed for coming in. What do you think the UK government can actually be doing now to try to guard this fragile peace?
I think we have to be honest at the fact that Britain has had no role whatsoever under Keir Starmer's government in even getting to this very seismic and momentous moment.
She's still an MP. I just kind of assumed that she was no longer an MP because they lost so many at the last election. Okay.
I think it's extraordinary that Keir Starmer apparently is going to Egypt tomorrow when we've got plenty of domestic issues that he should be resolving.
Isn't it right for him to be there? This is a major international
I think it's
moment.
a photo opportunity for him, to be very candid. The fact of the matter is that we've had Donald Trump, President Trump, and so many leaders in the region, and including Israel, really coming together. And I think it's also important to reflect, this is the second time this year that Egypt has been convening. President Sisi in May this year through the Cairo process, they started this process around negotiations, thinking about the future of Gaza, and rightly so. Because this is a pivotal moment now, Laura, because we need to see hope, not the type of division and hatred that we've seen. And by the way, that's the type of division and hatred we've seen on the streets of London through some of these ugly protests that have been taking place too. So we need this to move forward in a constructive way.
This is our political class. They are intentionally poisoning the discourse. That isn't a measured statement. 500,000 people were on the streets of London on Saturday. Is Priti Patel really saying that she thinks 500,000 people were on the streets of London because they are hateful anti-Semites? I mean, it's just ridiculous. Just ridiculous that is the point to which our public discourse has got to. Nobody believes that is the case. Even people who've got massive disagreements with that protest going ahead would acknowledge that the people who are attending that protest are people of good conscience who want to protest about what has happened in Gaza, who've got concerns about the ceasefire, who want to put pressure on the government to make the peace work. It's just totally disingenuous and inflammatory and dangerous to use this language around protest, to call it hate marches or whatever it is. And they know they're lying when they say it. They're doing it with a particular intent, which is dangerous. They want to shut down protest because they disagree with it. That's why.
And the way that could move forward is the Conservative position to back a two-state solution where Palestine would have its own state, Israel would have its own state, and they'd be able to live peacefully side by side. But Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, said recently he will never allow that. It will not happen. Do you condemn that position?
Well, I think we've moved on from that position. I think let's be very clear. What was said in the past, these talks have demonstrated that they've moved on now.
Well, hang on. He said this just a few days ago. He said, we are going to fulfill our promise. There will be no Palestinian state. This place belongs to us.
Well, the reality is there will be. This is the start of a process.
So Netanyahu's wrong.
He'll have to account for his own words. I'm not going to account for what he's said. The fact of the matter is, look, you've asked me my party's position. We've always said that we'd want a two-state solution only through a proper peace process. That process is starting now. This is very, very fragile. This is only the first phase. Let's be very clear about this. I don't think anyone should get ahead of themselves. Tomorrow will be quite a harrowing day, I suspect, when we see hostages being released. I remember seeing the first pictures of hostages in January when they were released.
Every single day of this conflict has been a harrowing day for those of us that have been paying attention. Of course, we're sympathetic to the hostages. They've endured 2 years, totally unnecessary. The war could have ended sooner, and they've had to deal with an Israeli state that didn't want to end the conflict because they had political priorities that weren't the same as wanting the hostages to be released. This was never about the hostages. If it was about the hostages, they wouldn't have rained down the bombs they did. They wouldn't have cut off food. They wouldn't have cut off water. Because the hostages had to deal with that too in Gaza.
It was pretty traumatic, and their testimony thereafter was really bad. And then, of course, we'll see potentially the prisoners, the Palestinian prisoners, being released as well. We've got a long way to go. Hamas needs to de-arm. There's no concept right now as to what putting down arms will look like. We are at the early stages of this. We have people returning to Gaza. You've shown the pictures yourself on the screens. That's very harrowing. There's no proper plan yet in terms of their housing, the basics, how they're going to be taken care of. And you asked what Britain's role should be. That was your first question to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Quite right. Point out that the Israeli state have captured thousands of political prisoners who've been through no due process, who are almost certainly in conditions that would violate their human rights. So it isn't just one side that has hostages. There's going to be a transfer as part of this deal. So really important to point that out. I don't know enough about Cyprus to comment. Generally speaking, if I'm not responding to comments in the chat, it's because I don't know enough about the situation to comment. My expertise is British politics and political ideas.
Britain should actually be using its leverage with our friends in the region. We have some great allies in the regions, starting with the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Qataris, the Egyptians.
So there's a huge
We've
amount
got
of
a
work
lot
to do.
of work to do,
Yeah.
and we must not be complacent at this stage.
So on the question of Nigel Farage, is he far right? Well, I think that label does apply to him. The only reason it wouldn't is because the centre in British politics moves, right? And in general, our discourse has shifted over time to be more on the right. You wouldn't have struggled if you went back even 5 years to call the kind of discourse, not just from Farage, but also from the Conservative Party, as being far right. So I'd go further than you're suggesting. I would say that the Conservative Party are far right, and Reform UK are far right in British politics at the moment. That's certainly what it looks like to me. But these terms are contested, right? There isn't a strict definition of what far right means. The centre ground of British politics moves because that's the nature of these things. And clearly, Reform UK have a great deal of support in the country. Around about a third of the country support Reform UK. So what I'm not saying is that a third of the country are far right. We need to find a way of speaking to people that support Reform UK and persuading them to have a different opinion. Because if we don't, we're going to get a Reform government, and I don't want that. I don't want that because I think that it'll be bad for the country, and I actually think it'll be bad for the people who vote Reform. Not just for me. But it's not a partisan point. Politics is about what's best for society as a whole, and that's not what Nigel Farage is offering. Because what he is offering, if we just look at the economics of it, he's offering to cut public services. He says if you go on the Reform website and you read what counts as a manifesto, he says he's going to find £50 billion worth of savings in the public sector. That can't be found. You can't find £50 billion of savings. What that means is £50 billion worth of cuts. That's not going to be good for any of us, particularly the poorest in our society, but we all depend upon public services. I worry about the National Health Service under Nigel Farage. He's talked about privatising it in the past. Again, this is consistent with what we know about him. He is a Thatcherite. And of course, I worry about his authoritarianism. People, I think, support what he says about immigration because they want a firmer stand on immigration. But if you're voting for a firmer stand to be taken against some people in our society, don't be surprised when the state turns on you. We shouldn't be trusting the state with more power over anybody and then expecting that it'll all be fine because we're not one of those people that we wanted the state's power to be used against. but I don't think people are going to be persuaded. I think Reform will win the next election, partly because the other two parties have let us down so much. The establishment parties have presided over austerity. They've presided over not investing enough in our public services, not doing enough about inequality, not doing enough to turn around areas of the country that have become run down. And immigration has been too high in recent times. There needs to be public consent for high levels of immigration, and voters elected governments, Conservative governments, that said that immigration would be in the tens of thousands. And not only did that not happen, but we had hundreds of thousands coming into the country. That didn't have public consent, and it's quite right that some people are angry about that. You know, I'm not sort of not that bothered about it. And I think immigration is generally good for the country, but it needs to have public consent. Otherwise, you start to have a country that becomes divided. So I think that's where politics is broken down.
These events have prompted, we've been having this morning, a lot of debate about the line between free speech and protest and unacceptable offence. And this week, your colleague Robert Jenrick attended court with a man who was being prosecuted for burning a Quran. Would it be okay to do the same if somebody had burnt a copy of the Torah or perhaps a copy of the Christian Bible?
Well, fundamentally, we believe in free speech.
So that
and
would
an
be
expression of free speech. However, right now, let's be very clear.
So Reform have said they want to nationalise things, but that's because they're populists, right? It's not, and it's also not. Even a free marketeer, when looking at a natural monopoly like water, would have to concede that the arguments that normally apply to privatisation don't apply. So I've literally just done a video about this. Go and watch it if you're interested in these questions. The argument for privatising industry is that you can have competition between firms, and that leads to innovation and should lower prices, and that's good for firms and it's good for consumers, right? That's what free marketeers would say. But those arguments don't apply to sectors of the economy where there can't be competition. So water is an example of that. It's a natural monopoly, so is energy, so is rail. So I don't think it's inconsistent with believing in free markets and believing in privatisation to be in favour of nationalising natural monopolies.
Look what happened on the streets of London yesterday. I mean, you know, look at the level of hatred that was demonstrated on the streets of London to Britain's Jewish community.
But
I think right now it is right that we have the freedom of expression. We stand by that. My party, even in government, stood by freedom of expression and the ability to protest.
No, you didn't. You literally didn't. What on earth? Sorry. Priti Patel is saying that she was in favour of freedom of protest. Are you kidding me? There was a whole Kill the Bill movement around protesting against the policing bill and the public order bill that she set in train. Her government and her as Home Secretary passed a bill that made it illegal to engage in noisy and disruptive protest. How on earth can she say that she's in favour of free speech and protest? How on earth can she say that?
Home Secretary, and we put forward.
Indeed, so you know all about these areas, but your colleague Robert Jenrick...
And no challenge. No challenge from the BBC's political editor. She knows that's total bollocks. That in fact, in office, she did exactly the opposite. But,
Justice Secretary, so obviously with a keen interest in the law.
Well, we all have an interest in the law.
But the position he's taken is to back somebody who's being prosecuted for burning a holy book. Would it right now be okay? Does he deserve backing? Would somebody deserve backing if they burnt a copy of the Jewish Torah or even of the Bible?
As far as I know, Laura, that's taking place through many of these protests that we see. You know, we see all sorts.
Oh my God. As far as I know, Laura, that's happening. No, it isn't happening. It isn't happening because the protests are about what's happening, what the Israeli state is doing in Gaza. People are not burning holy books on these protests. Just pure deflection, isn't it? Actually, as it happens, I think in the United States that probably would be lawful. because they have First Amendment rights to absolute free speech, almost without limits in the United States. To the extent that you had the Westboro Baptist Church back in the day, they're probably still around, holding up, I won't say what that was on the signs and on the feed, grossly offensive signs outside of the funerals of dead soldiers. And that was deemed in the United States lawful speech. I don't think we want to be in a situation like that in the UK. Free speech is all about context, right? So if you're sitting in a university seminar room discussing politics and philosophy and economics, you're probably going to want free speech so you can engage in a discourse and try and get to the truth together. Same thing applies to academic papers, public discussion. But context matters, right? So I'm not a free speech absolutist. I do think in some contexts, speech does need to be constrained. But you need to design laws that allow, the maximum possible free speech without hitting up against those constraints. And you shouldn't pretend that things are other than what they are, right? So when Priti Patel says there, as far as I know, people are burning holy books in these marches, it's just total bollocks. He knows that's not true. And Laura Kuenssberg's probably just going to ignore that comment.
Of terrible things said about the Jewish state, Jewish people openly spouting horrible anti-Semitic, racist views about the Jewish community.
But just on this specific point, burning holy books
look, I've made it quite clear already.
For you.
In that case, obviously that was an expression of free speech. No one was prosecuted for that. And that...
Hang on. It's okay to literally burn the Quran, but it's not okay to protest what the state of Israel is doing in Gaza. It's just insane. There's no clear principles here. It's just like, I don't like these people, so I want to use the full force of the law against them. And she did when she was Home Secretary.
Is the law as it stands right now. The real issue, I think, is actually not about those examples. The real problem we have in this country right now are these hate marches where people are being so racist to the Jewish community. That is unacceptable. That is consuming. Come to London, the Metropolitan Police is causing chaos around our...
If this was true, right? It's not true, right? But if it was true, there are existing laws that the police could use to deal with those people. And some people have been arrested on various marches for these reasons. You're not allowed to engage in hateful speech in the UK. And I know there's been a lot of controversy around this, but those laws are correct, right? It should be illegal to engage in hate speech, racist hate speech. But the laws exist, right? So if she was right, hypothetically, if 500,000 people were marching through the streets of London and genuinely they were all racists, then the police would have to round them all up. But that isn't true. It is a lie.
Communities on our streets, and I just don't think that's acceptable. And as for Keir Starmer, that's the one thing him and his government should be absolutely gripping, and they should be backing the police and giving the police the tools that they need to stop this terrible level of anti-Semitism on the streets of Britain.
Just briefly, if you can, Bridget Phillipson said essentially the China spy case collapsed partly because of what your government did.
That's utter nonsense, and that's a bold statement from her. I was Home Secretary for over 3 years, and we were absolutely crystal clear that China was a threat, an adversary, and I led a lot of our national security operations around China and all the details on that. I think the government has to account for the position that it's taken, and it's pretty obvious now that there was political interference when it came to the collapse of that trial.
OK, I'm pretty sure also it'll be raised in Parliament tomorrow. Priti Patel, great to have you with us this morning.
OK, so I am going to leave that there. I've actually got a bit of a headache. Is this how everybody feels when they watch politics these days? I sort of have to do this because I've got a channel and my channel's about politics, so I have to engage with it. But I really feel like sometimes just switching off from it all. And there's a reason I don't get up early in the morning to watch Sunday with Laura Kuenssberg. It drives me mad. Britain First are a fascist, racist group. I don't I don't like them at all, obviously. Just responding to a comment in the chat. And one of the mistakes that I keep making, I really like fizzy water. I drink it compulsively. I didn't used to. I went on a holiday to Italy and a friend of mine ordered fizzy water for the table, San Pellegrino. And ever since then, I've been addicted to fizzy water. Unfortunately, it's not great if you're streaming because it makes you want to burp all of the time. But I don't actually have a headache. I think I just need to not watch Laura Kuenssberg for a bit. And have a nice relaxing bath, go to bed. I'm at work again next week. I was off work this week. It was lovely because my brother got married last weekend. I was at his wedding and I thought, well, I'll take a week off work, which is why the videos have been coming out more often and why I've done a few live streams. I hope I'll be able to continue to do that as I return to work. I work for a trade union, so you'll have lots of emails from members wanting my help and support, which I'll be happy to do. There we go. Hopefully you've enjoyed this stream. Do comment, let me know what I could be doing better. If you enjoy my content, there are ways of contributing to the channel. You could join as a member, only 99p month. Of course, doing this is quite a bit of work, but I enjoy it. There we go. And it's nice to have your company this evening. I was supposed to be going to the pub, so but both my friends pulled out, so I came here instead. Anyway, cheerio. Nice to have you on this live stream.